Hi guys, it's DanMinigun from Mushroom Cloud Gaming bringing you another discussion video. Today's video is unfortunately one I regret doing, but at the same time I would like to clarify some things. It will be a critique of a particular YouTuber who goes by the name DownwardThrust. Now I have tentatively mentioned his channel a number of times, such as in my Let's Play Rush video. But of course that was an informal affair and I didn't really critique him per se. In that case I was talking about his reaction to the premium edition and how, in his words, EA has ripped us off. But this will not be the topic of this video. The topic of this video is another video he actually did, entitled Why Battlefield is a Terrible and Great Franchise. Unsurprisingly, we'll be focusing on the section that deals with Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 1. The actual video is 17 minutes long, but anything past the 13-minute mark is not relevant to our case. So let's get started. The first point of contention I have is that he suddenly proclaimed that Battlefield 4 is the best in the franchise. Now there's obviously nothing wrong with considering a particular game to be your favorite, but proclaiming a game to be the best in a franchise without concrete evidence is a bit weird. Now these opinions are not unique to DownwardThrust, in fact they are actually common occurrences within the community, especially those who do not like Battlefield 1. So without further ado, let's start assessing these issues. If we open up his video and go to the 13-minute and 10-second mark, we find the first mistake. This mistake was that, in his words, Battlefield 4 severed the community with its DLC packs, which amounted to 9. Now I'm sure if you actually play BF4 you will know that the premium system only had 5 DLC packs. The other 4 he's mentioned are actually free content packs post-premium. Now I am not arguing anything in favor of premium. In fact, I utterly hate the system, and in fact I have criticized DownwardThrust for a video proclaiming that Battlefield Premium Edition, for Battlefield 1 of course, was a bad thing. But let's put that aside, let's continue examining this video piece by piece. Now let's go back to the fact that he proclaimed that Battlefield 4, and I quote, is the best in the franchise by a mile. Again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with liking a game in a particular franchise. After all, despite the factual issues a game may have, the enjoyment of said game is subjective. For instance, I simply know people who don't like BF1 because it's set in World War 1. Simple as that, really. And of course you can't really argue with that, and there is really no need to argue with that. What I will argue with is the incorrect facts stated in these videos. Well, at least this particular video anyway. We'll get back to why this statement is actually very annoying, because we'll need to examine if any, concrete facts were made for this opinion. Now, referring to the 40-minute and 30-second mark, this is where the Battlefield 1 rant commences. The first point of contention is that he states that Battlefield 1 is not a fun experience, which is fine and dandy really, but the explanation to why this is, well, lacking to say the least. And therefore, at this point, the explanation as to why starts. At the 40-minute and 51-second mark, the first issue that DownwardThrust with Battlefield 1 manifests itself. Battlefield 1 is not historically accurate. Yeah, that's the first reason. Now, let me demonstrate why this reason is ridiculous. This is a trailer for Battlefield 1942, Secret Weapons of World War II. I don't think I need to say anything, do I? Now of course, he attempts to cement this argument in stating that the developer stated that Battlefield 1 is supposed to be rooted in history. This is of course exactly what the developer said. Unfortunately, he completely missed 2 other important citations. As you can clearly see, the developer actually said that they are looking at World War I from a modern lens. In fact, if he had followed any of the Battlefield 1 promotional material, the developers in one particular video actually said this.
We're not recreating the past. We're taking that as an inspiration and then we're trying to take this into a modern perspective.
Throughout the video he also makes allusions that Battlefield 1 was expected to be a more realistic game. I am not sure why he thought this, because if we look at Battlefield 4, why that game is not historically accurate because it's not based on a historical conflict. Nothing in that game makes sense from a realistic perspective. Most of the weapons are not even used by real militaries. If Battlefield 4 were realistic, we'll just have a handful of assault rifles and of course light machine guns and any other kit used during modern war, but relevant to that faction. But I'll not waste time too much on this topic because we all know that Battlefield isn't a realistic game, and expecting to be is quite frankly ridiculous. At the 40-minute and 55 mark, the worst offender appears. And I quote, "Battlefield 1 is an incredibly fast game, probably the fastest game in the series, and skipping ahead a bit, it is an action game with a World War I paint job." Now I find the last part funny because it essentially describes every other Battlefield game in existence. I mean, Battlefield 4, none of that makes sense. Jets don't work like that, helicopters don't work like that. In general, the range of engagement Battlefield 4 is extremely compressed from what we expect in reality. Now, of course, you could make the argument that, oh, well, Battlefield 4 is set in modern, and in modern times you'd expect assault rifles regardless of what they are. That would be true. Unfortunately, you can't make that argument without being so selective. In fact, if we actually look at history, we see ample use of automatic weapons in World War I. This includes the Lewis gun, the MG0815 and Showshot, all of which are featured in Battlefield 1 and are very common. In fact, the very silly idea of walking fire was devised during World War I, and indeed enshrined in the Shellshot machine rifle's design, and also the later Browning automatic rifle. If you're interested in this topic, I will link some videos by Ian McCullum from Forgotten Weapons. Of course, the argument that most soldiers were armed with bolt-action rifles rings true. But again, this is very selective in Battlefield's context, because Battlefield covers multiple engagements. For example, in the St. Quentin Scar campaign, there was an ample use of MP-18 submachine guns, because this is supposed to represent the German spring offensives of 1918. German stormtroopers were equipped with MP-18 submachine guns, Gewehr 98s as well, ample use of hand grenades, which is ironic because he complains about the grenade spam, which by the way I agree with. I do not like grenade spam at all, and I don't think that historical accuracy is justifiable in this regard. And of course they also used light machine guns such as the Madsen, even though at this point the Madsen was actually very rare because no one was producing it during the war and many were simply lost in combat. Now, the first part of that statement, Battlefield 1 is an incredibly fast game. Okay, what are you referring to here? The time to kill? The movement speed? The loading time? I don't know what he's referring to. Pretty much every single damn thing in Battlefield 1 is much slower than Battlefield 4. The vehicles, much slower. We have large land vehicles with multi-person seats and that require complete teamwork, such as the landship, and aerial bombers, which also require a surprising degree of teamwork. Battlefield 4 had this, of course, in the form of the attack chopper or the scout helicopter. But again, in Battlefield 1, they are featured much more prominently because they are not very useful on their own. If you refer to the gunplay, that is simply not true. The time to kill for most weapons are slower than Battlefield 4. Even with the new Time to Kill 2.0 patch. If we look at LMGs, they are not simply 200 round assault rifles. They require a slow ADS time and time to recover their spread because of their negative spread mechanic. SMGs, you can't just run and gun with them because they have an engagement distance. In BF4 you could quite simply take an AEK and use it at every distance while still having access to medkits. If we look at the running speeds, Battlefield 4's running speed was actually faster, so I don't know where this is coming from. The idea that Battlefield 1 is just a simple mindless run and gun shooter is absurd. We have an entire class, the medic class, which features semi-automatic slow-firing weapons. Sure, some of them are full auto, but they still fire quite slow compared to BF4. All this, tied with the class balance and engagement distance mentality of Battlefield 1, creates a game which is actually balanced and requires thought. It favors the player who thinks about situations, not just simply runs headfirst into a corridor on Amiens. Sure, it can kill one target fast, even 2 or 3 if you're good, but just killing one target quickly isn't good enough. You need to play the objective and be smart. You have to use cover effectively, you have to stick with your teammates. If you're running around randomly, then you're not playing the game right. Even BF4 did not feature this. In BF4, you had to think about things, but it was also easier to run around with an assault rifle being good at every range. BF1 simply does not do this. There is no one gun that can do everything. It tries to emphasize this point at the 15-minute and 23-second mark, stating that Battlefield 1's basic game premise is run as fast as you can between objectives. Now another thing he mentions is the sentry kits. Now I can understand the frustration with sentry kits. I have actually made a video discussing how they could be improved. Mainly because they do not give any audio feedback to the player who is about to turn a corner and face one. Other than that, they can be countered even by a single hit, from a bayonet, a rocket or a melee from behind, of course. In my opinion, they're actually less frustrating to fight than vehicles, because vehicles generally require more team effort to bring down, whereas an elite kit can be killed by a single player. Also, for some reason, Himera is the sentence with the carry more explosives than is humanly possible. I mean, why is this even relevant? In BF4 you could carry an M240B, a UCAV, a mortar and grenades. How is Battlefield 1 any different? Finally, there is actually one point I agree with, the behemoths. I think they just create a one-sided game. That being said, I prefer them to Battlefield 4's gimmicky evolution, but I still prefer if they were not there. Fortunately for me, I play Frontlines most of the time, so I don't really deal with it so much. At the 16-minute mark exactly, he states that wasn't Battlefield 1 supposed to return to the old design of Battlefield? Again, which game are you referring to? Battlefield 4? Battlefield 1942? Battlefield Vietnam? I don't know. But assuming we're talking about the oldest entry in the series, Battlefield 1942, then yes, Battlefield 1 is very similar to Battlefield 1942. We have class interdependency. No microburst method that can kill everything at any range. We have vehicles that require significant team effort to kill. You could also argue that Battlefield 1, just like Battlefield 1942, takes quite a bit of liberties with the World War I, or in that case, World War II team. I mean, in Battlefield 1942 we had faction-specific weapons, which I think is a terrible idea in Battlefield, but whatever. Where the Soviets were equipped with a BAR as default, or the Japanese with the MP18. My point is that Battlefield has never ever adhered to strict historical realism. It feels authentic in the sense that it's well made and you can get the feel of World War I or World War II, or at least what we think of World War I or World War II, because if we look at World War II, there was also ample use of bolt-action rifles in there anyway, and many World War II games actually forego this, except the more hyper-realistic ones such as Red Orchestra. At the 16-minute and 10-second mark we have overhauling the principles of the game. Yes, they did. For starters, they added Frontlines, a completely new way to play the game, as is Operations, even though I don't like Operations all that much. The weapon and class balance was remade from the ground up. For example, SMGs have a first shot spread multiply. You can't just two-shot burst at any range, like we could do in Battlefield 4. I mean, the extent of the gunplay in Battlefield 4 was click fast. That's it. You can do well with almost any gun at any range. In fact, the only exception is probably the PDWs, which were quite interesting in their balance, because they had a specific engagement distance, where assault rifles really could do it all. Or let's take LMGs, which have negative spread and slow ADS times, which favor positioning rather than run and gun. Or you know, the medic class, which is exclusively slow-firing semi-auto rifles, as I mentioned earlier. Even Scout got an overall the sweet spot mechanic, even though I do not particularly like it, even though it makes sense from a balance perspective. It's just frustrating to get one hit kill from a mile away. In fact, this is something he does mention at least, but again, it doesn't make for a worse experience overall in my opinion. All this leads to an increase in potential teamwork. And of course we will never see detailed teamwork in a random 64-player game. We will have to play with friends. But you will have much more greater advantage in Battlefield 1 than Battlefield 4 when it comes to teamwork, simply because the classes on their own, if you're playing Rambo, do not work so well at every situation. This also applies to the vehicles really. You can't speed across the map with a 360-degree turret taking on enemies at every range. Battlefield 1's vehicles, for good or ill, are much slower. Now he concludes that he loves Battlefield and he will be critical about it, which is actually what you should do. But being critical does not mean being negative without reason. There is a difference between hating a game and ranting, and hating a game and explaining why you don't like it. I don't call Battlefield 3 a shit game just because I don't like it. I could easily do that and call it a day, but that is not interesting in the slightest, and is misleading. And also, if I'm going to be accused, which I will probably be, of being biased in favor of Battlefield 1, of course I'm a bit biased. I like Battlefield 1. But at least, when I don't like something in Battlefield 1, I specify. For example, if you look at any of my comments that I've linked in the description below from Reddit, or even some of my previous videos, you will see things I don't like about Battlefield 1. I don't like its terrible RSP that doesn't let communities flourish. I don't like its half-assed platoon system. I don't like its party system. I don't like the sweet spot mechanic, even though that's a bit more subjective. So there are things I don't like about Battlefield 1. Every Battlefield game had things I don't like about it, but Battlefield 1, in my opinion, does the most things right. I'd take Battlefield 1 over any quickscope quick knife hit registration fail faster. This was Back Company 2, for example. But until then, I guess this was my own rant on his rant. Until then, this has been DanMinigun from Mushroom Cloud Gaming. I hope you're going to have a good day and perhaps clarified some of the misconceptions you have on Battlefield 1. I'll see you guys on the battlefield.